Hello and welcome to the Chamber Connection podcast. You have come across the strategic planning episode. Now get ready. Your jaws are going to hit the floor. We have Stu Harrison and Shelley Morris joining us. I know we're freaking out too. We had them on this and had a blast. And we've got some amazing tips in here, some tools and tactics, some things that maybe you want to avoid for the next time you and your chamber are going through a strategic plan. From this episode, you should be able to have a bit of a base as to what you can do to set your chamber up for the next few years. Very exciting episode. You're going to walk away with a lot. And I hope your pen is ready because here we go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber Connection, where we explore the ins and outs of chamber management and the key strategies that drive success. And today we're diving into the vital topic of strategic planning. And we are so lucky to have two incredibly experienced guests and really kind of rock star status in the chamber world. And they've both made significant impacts in our network. So first we have Shelley Morris, whose career could be described as executive director in a box. I love that, Shelley. That was so great. So Shelley's got 35 years of experience in chamber management, including her time as CEO of the Winnipeg Chamber. She's revamped strategic planning processes for numerous organizations, and she is happy to lend us some of that knowledge today. Now retired, semi-retired, I guess, Shelley, you can give us some good reflections with a few bucket list holidays left to plan in your future. And joining her is Stu Harrison. Stu is the current executive director of the Chamber of Commerce Executives of Ontario, and he brings over 19 years of experience as president and CEO of the Greater Peterborough Chamber of Commerce, along with a diverse background in small business ownership and local media. His dedication to the chamber industry has earned him several prestigious awards, including the Canadian Chamber Executive of the Year. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Hi.
Thanks.
Hi, Shelley.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. Really appreciate you coming on this episode. And yeah, like Melanie said previous, like it's amazing to have both of you on this episode with us. It's huge. And then I guess we'll just kind of get into it a little bit. I don't know, haven't had an opportunity to quickly talk with you guys for a little bit, but what's maybe a quick snapshot of what's been going on in your worlds since, and then you're also maybe disconnected from a few folks out in the network, so maybe a quick update on what you've been up to for the last little while.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, go Shelley. You got this.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I've been retired officially from CCEC for a year now. I'm still actually the administrator with the Chamber of Commerce Executives of British Columbia. Better make sure I get the new name right. And we just had a board meeting yesterday, so that organization is going strong, but definitely happy with the opportunity to wind down work and wind up play. Had a chance to go to Africa last year. In a couple of weeks, I'm heading on a e-bike trip of Portugal. So trying to get a little more travel in, spending time at the lake and just doing fun stuff and enjoying life. But I still miss seeing all the chamber peeps and Melanie and Steve and Stu. It's so great to see your faces and be a part of this podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Nice. Similarly, I've been retired for about a year and a half. And I run the Chamber of Commerce Executives of Ontario. I made the mistake that Shelley was avoiding because there's been a lot of development within the Chamber network, and we've created this umbrella organization in the Chamber of Commerce Executives of Canada, which Shelley used to run. And then there are provincial organizations or chapters, if you will, and Ontario is one of those. It's a bold new move, and it's a fantastic it's a fantastic structure and working out really well, which took a lot of strategic planning to figure out how to go about it. But and similarly, trying to ramp up a bit of travel. We have a daughter who lives in Scotland. In fact, my wife is there right now, and we're very project driven. So we've been, sort of building buildings and that sort of thing around our property, and just enjoying life, trying to slow down a little bit and yet still stay plugged in. And I think Shelley and I are both in situations that we really appreciate because we get to stay in touch with people that we've become really good friends with, including the four of us over the years. And so it's terrific to see everybody.
You're making everybody jealous with all your travel.
Mm,
All the execs that are listening are thinking, "Hey, wait a minute. How do I get on one of
yeah.
those?" And
Well,
you're both thinking
20
more
more years,
years. Yeah.
Melanie.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Wonderful. Okay, so we touched on strategic planning. Let's hop to it because that's what we're here for. This is for both of you, but Stu, I'll kind of start with you. But if just over generally, what makes kind of a good strategic plan? What are some great starting off points for people to get their heads wrapped around?
I think if you don't have one, you just take the first step, jump and build the net on the way down. Because I certainly believe that it's important to have some sort of structure in place that lets you and your staff, and particularly your board of directors, as well as your members, know who you are as an organization and why you exist and where you're headed. And those are the fundamentals of a strategic plan. And so, I think if you don't have one, then start. If you've got one that's dusty and old and been sitting on the shelf, then update it. And there's all sorts of ways that we'll get into as to how to go about that, both, big budget and small.
Shelley,
Perfect.
what about you? What do you think when you've led strat plan sessions? What are the keys to success that you find, the ones that you look at and go, oh, that's great, that'll be successful.
Well, a couple of things. I think first of all, it's important who you involve, and I know we may talk about that a little bit later, but also to make sure that the people involved have a common base of knowledge going into it. So I think it's important to set the stage with, basic information that people are going to need in order to make informed decisions about the plan. Be realistic about the resources that your organization has. I always think with a strategic plan, depending on the size of your chamber and how long the plan is, 1 to 5 objectives. If you're a very small chamber with one staff person and you can tackle one new initiative, that's great. Don't overextend yourself. I think that's a mistake that sometimes organizations can make in planning. So be realistic. And I guess a third thing I would say is make sure you use the plan. Lots of organizations develop plans, but how often do you hear about those plans being left on the shelf and never looked at again until that 3-year cycle is complete? So I really think it's important. If you go to the work, the expense, the time and effort of involving your staff and volunteers, make sure that plan then drives your organization. I always think that framework should make its way onto your board of directors agenda and really, drive the discussion at meetings and all the decision making that you're doing. So those are a couple of things off the top of my head.
Those are
I
great
think
points.
your
Sorry.
last
I was
point.
just gonna say, I took that from Stu. It's part of my agenda now. I use my
Yeah.
strat plan and that's how we drive our strategic discussion.
Yeah.
So that we always keep our eye on that ball.
No, that's what I was going to say. Just bake it right into your agenda at all your board meetings, and you almost forces the discussion. So it's a good way to keep it live.
Yeah, that's a fantastic, great way to fall through with it. Perfect.
I love too making sure that people are prepared because I think we live our chamber every day for, we live and breathe it. So a lot of things feel like they're givens. and we don't give the same permission to our board or to our volunteers to kind of see the magic behind the curtain or to peek behind the curtain.
Right.
And I think that the work involved in letting people know what we've done before and what we're hoping to accomplish can really help inform a solid strat plan. So that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would spend about an hour on the agenda, either the CEO, executive director, or, could be one of your board members, but I think actually the CEO or executive director should spend an hour going over sort of the status of the chamber, the key performance indicators, maybe key environmental issues that are going to be important to the chamber. Because yeah, your board members are coming in, once a month, maybe at the most, some once a quarter. And they just can't be expected to have that same sort of hands-on knowledge and retention of the issues like you do. And I think it's been doubly driven home for me because since I have more free time, I've joined a few more boards. And as a new board member on some of those organizations, I'm living and breathing, oh yeah, it's different being the board member than the staff person. Like, it's really valuable to have those debriefs from the CEO to kind of keep you up to speed on what's going on. So I think that having that kind of review at the beginning of a strat plan, or maybe it's, a board meeting before the strat plan, really sets the stage for everyone having a solid common foundation of information.
Yeah, you kind of dabbled, like you were kind of talking about it there, but like also in your previous comments, what might be some elements that, like as a staff person, you'd want to prep to have ready for your board, or like what are some things that you can walk them through before you get totally into that session, so they're in the right frame of mind and they have the right information in front of them?
I would say that if you are working with an existing strategic plan, then have the plan drive the discussion, or have, something that is, a more immediate issue or crisis, have that drive the discussion. But the fact that you have strategic discussion baked into your board agenda means that you essentially have to come up with something to talk about. And I think you just trust your instincts when it comes to how much information you want to send out in the board package. Or, it's not down to picking up the color of the napkins at your gala. It's much more strategic and, a much more serious discussion. So you kind of provide the background that you feel is necessary in order to have an actual, full discussion and get the input from your board that you're looking for. Because I mean, after all, that's really fundamentally what your board is there for, is to provide you with the help and advice and perspective in order to keep that plan alive, make good decisions. But yeah, I would say fundamentally, if your plan is based on certain pillars or goals, just pull out the next goal if you don't have anything else to talk about, and just go through, okay, last year at the retreat, we decided on goal number 3. Here's where we're at. Here's the scorecard, however way you want to handle that. That's how I would approach it.
I'm curious if some execs don't do that though, especially if they're lagging in their KPIs because they're afraid to shine a light on things that aren't being accomplished, which aren't always the fault of the chamber. It's environmental, as Shelley touched on. So maybe we could spend a couple of minutes talking about, so if I'm a new executive and I don't know, what my KPIs are, or what my environmental factors or risk might be, what would those things be? So Shelley, if you were coming in and running my strategic plan, what types of things would you ask me so that you could help me build a plan for my chamber?
I think Stu's correct in taking the existing plan first and looking at, what did we accomplish? What's still outstanding? And there may be reasons for that. I mean, sometimes priorities change over the course of 3 years, but your planning session is an opportunity to address that. I think you also want to look at organizational KPI like membership, revenue. Are you reaching your budgets, your event performance? Participation in programs, is it going up or down? Because those measures will help you assess are these things we want to continue doing? Because if, golf tournament or whatever, if your experience is that numbers are declining, well, to me, you need that data to make informed decisions. And, that's only really one piece of strategic planning, to look at some of the things like membership and events. But, I think it's an important opportunity to do that. And then the other piece that I really like to bring in is when I'm doing strategic planning sessions, I actually like to do a survey of the board in advance of the planning session. And you could involve committee chairs. I mean, I think there was a question that we might get into as to who you do involve, but definitely the board. And I like to canvass the board in advance of the strategic planning session to find out, what do you think are the priorities? What's most important to our members? Like, what are the members' issues? And also, what are the organizational issues? And I think if you can gather some of that information in advance, a couple of things. One, it gives your board members a chance to think about it on their own before the planning session. So ideally, they will come to the session, more engaged, that they've thought about these things. I know that's ideally, but that's the wish anyway. And sometimes what it can do is, if you have board members that maybe aren't as gregarious or vocal at meetings as others, it gives them a chance to get their input on the table. So I usually summarize the results of a board survey, and then I'll present that to the board, and it kind of, it kickstarts the planning session without having to go through, filling out all the information on the flip chart. You can get a good sense of where the board members coming from before the meeting, and maybe try and, package up, okay, here's where we see the directions that the board seems to think we should be going in. But by presenting the information at the meeting, it gives all the board members a chance to kind of weigh what each other have said. Because Stu, you may have thought of things that I didn't think of, but now that that's on the table, yeah, that's a really good idea. So those are some of the things that I would try and bring to the table, either before the meeting or as the kind of the start of the meeting, to again get everybody on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Can I just build on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because the next level of that, and Shelley certainly knows this, is that you don't know what you don't know when it comes to planning for the next year, the next couple of years as a Chamber of Commerce. So you certainly want to include what I would call stakeholders, and that could mean a lot of things, from local groups that you work with. You might have an economic development organization. You might include your municipal council as a stakeholder group, your municipal staff as stakeholder groups. You certainly want to include your own staff if you have employees, and there are ways to do that. Some people are a little hesitant to bring them right into the boardroom. But the bottom line is, you certainly need their input, first of all, because it's valuable. But secondly, you don't want them to feel left out of the process, and that they're just handed this new plan that they had absolutely no input into. Surveys, absolutely. And you can broaden, to your entire membership or your stakeholder groups. You can handle that stakeholder interviews, just one-on-one, or as a focus group kind of thing. But if you do that work and you go through that process, you'll discover things that you would have never discovered on your own, and realize that, yeah, maybe as a chamber, we've been remiss, because there's this whole thing going on over here that we just didn't see coming. And now it's part of your strategic plan and a key goal for the next year or two. So I would say that, don't feel that all of the questions that you need to ask. Sometimes you just need to broaden it out a little bit so that you can find out what's really happening with your stakeholders.
Yeah, that's some excellent prep, like the surveys and involving everyone on every different layer. And yeah, if you don't have the right questions, at least you're trying, or get the conversation started. Yeah, great points.
I like how,
I think.
Yeah, Shelley, I was just going to say, I love how you said member issues and the organization's issues, because they're not often the same. Sometimes they're separate. But really, what are we here for? We're here to solve our members' problems at the end of the day, right? And that can put you on a different direction.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So with all that prep involved, what are either in that process or while you're going through the whole thing, maybe what are some risks involved with strategic planning, or maybe some pitfalls that some organizations kind of fall into while they're going through this, and maybe some ways that we can maybe avoid it or mitigate that risk a little bit? Do you have anything that comes to mind on some of those for anybody that's maybe fresh to get into this strategic planning session?
Yeah, well, there's certainly lots of people that are fresh. There's lots of chambers that don't really have one. And it suggests to me that they're either daunted by the process, or afraid of the process. And by afraid, I simply mean it's as I've just adequately described, it can be a daunting process, right? And you just captured it, Stephen, by saying after all of that prep, it is a bit of work. You do have a board of directors. If you don't have the budget to have someone come in as a facilitator and help you through all of that, there are certainly ways to simplify it. And I would certainly encourage that. Google is certainly your friend. Just Google, strategic planning tools, and there's all kinds of ideas out there. But I think the bottom line is that the pitfalls are just simply like eating an elephant one bite at a time. You just tackle them and just deal with it, and then you carry on. And you might be, if you're a very small chamber with the desire for a plan, you might be a year doing the prep because it's just you doing it, or you and a couple of board members that are already overworked, but you're trying to take your chamber from here to there, and that's not always easy. But I would say there's not very many chambers in Canada right now that are not looking at how to get their chamber from there to over there right now, because everybody's trying to figure out what this post-COVID chamber looks like.
Yeah.
I think some of the pitfalls can sometimes have to do with the personalities around the table at your planning session. So that's where sometimes an outside facilitator can provide value. I mean, some of the sessions I've been at, there's people just at your board meetings that may try to dominate the sessions, and they've got lots to say without allowing other people to contribute. So you always have to watch for that. I mean, I think it's really important in planning sessions that your facilitator makes a point of getting input from everyone, going around the room in some form or another and making sure that everyone is participating. And sometimes that's hard. But I guess the advantage that an outside facilitator has that maybe the board chair or the executive director is more difficult to do is an outside facilitator can nicely ask somebody or suggest that, we'd like to hear from everyone else too, or if someone is on, kind of a pet project maybe that they're trying to push on the agenda, I think an outside facilitator can suggest that those items be put in the parking lot because there doesn't seem to be a large majority that want to see this pursued. So even though, as Stu said, sometimes chambers don't have big budgets, there's sometimes value to bringing in an outside facilitator, even if it's just for the purpose of running the meeting. Like the executive director could write up the plan afterwards, which, can take time. The executive director can do things like the surveys and a lot of that prep work. But there's sometimes value in having that outside person who's, doesn't have an agenda to take control of the meeting. Some of the other pitfalls might be from one scope to the other, taking on too much. You end up with a plan that has way too ambitious for the organization. Or on the other end, you get too tactical in the planning. And the strategic plan should not be the forum for, as you said, getting into the color of the napkins or other nitty gritty. You want to, keep the big picture in mind. So I think, that's where an outside facilitator can sometimes be useful too, is being able to identify when you're getting in the weeds and moving people out. Also, I've seen strategic planning sessions where the time's not well used. So that's another advantage of an outside facilitator. Part of their role is keeping the agenda on time, not letting one person dominate and, force talking about their pet project when you've got a whole ream of other things that you need to address on the agenda. So, maybe just some things for people to be aware of if you are going in and doing the planning yourself.
I use a process called prune and prioritize because, people love coming up with new ideas, especially marketing ideas, and it all gets thrown against the wall, typical, flip chart kind of thing, although there's all sorts of technology ways to do that now. But the most important role, I think, for a facilitator is to be able to call a dumb idea a dumb idea. We call that the parking lot, Shelley, right? But if you don't have somebody like that, and it doesn't have to be like a paid position, you don't have to fly in a consultant or something like that. It can just be someone who isn't the executive director, isn't on the board, who's got permission from everybody to play that role. Because without it, it's really just another board meeting with all of the things that Shelley has outlined, with all those personalities and all that baggage and all those agendas. It's just longer. So I'm a big believer in getting some outside help.
Here's a thought. Maybe this is the little nugget we can take away, is why not offer that to your fellow chambers, your neighboring geographical chambers that,
just great idea.
Trade some services that way. And,
Love it.
because Stu, I know when you came in and did our strat plan and led that exercise for us, it was good for me because I felt safe. I felt like you were going to protect my interests, but also the chamber's interests and give the adequate respect to the board that was needed. And something I'm happy to share is you pulled me aside and you noted some behavior of mine that could potentially have been a problem that I wasn't able to see. And so it was super valuable for me just in my personal growth and development. So that outside influence, I think, is very useful for sure.
I love the idea because, most chamber managers, unless they're brand spanking new, have been through several strategic planning sessions. So, they'd be pretty capable with a bit of a roadmap. And I'll give you one before we're done, the system that I use, and it's easily findable online. There's pretty simple, straightforward processes to get yourself through a strategic plan. I'll give you a quick example. Right now, we had a post on our Facebook group for the Ontario Chamber Executives, and a relatively new chamber manager was talking about a 3P versus a 3C chamber, and not very many people, including myself, could remember what that actually meant or had ever heard of it. But then I remembered, I think it had something to do with the American Chamber of Commerce Executives. And they went through this whole study and they created this structure to ask yourself whether or not you're a 3P chamber, and I have to consult my notes, parades, pageants, and parties, or are you a 3C chamber, catalyst, convener, and a champion? And somebody posted on that Facebook group discussion that they were actually using that as a fundamental question for their board during their strategic planning retreat, because they wanted to transition or transform from a 3P chamber to a 3C chamber because they just felt that parties and pageants weren't going to last, and that it was much more important for them to up their game as a convener and a champion of their members and all of those things, right? And I just thought it was a brilliant application of a very simple tool to have a really meaningful discussion with your board. And so, I think there's just lots of ways to go about this, but you have to have somebody who can have that conversation with your board.
The other thing that I've seen chambers do is if you have a planning company in your membership, sometimes they'll do it for a sponsorship or just to be a good corporate member. And I don't know if they still do it, but at one time, community futures organizations would provide help with planning at little or no cost. So yeah, there's definitely ways that you can get things done, and chambers are good at getting things done without a big cost. So.
So I definitely want to get back to what individual processes you each use. And Stu, to your point, there's so many that are out there, which is great because then you can find the one that suits you the best. But let's say you've got a strat plan at the end of a session, whether you've written it yourself or you've had the budget. How do you make sure that your organization lives and breathes it? So that's your board, that's your staff, that's you as the leader. How do you, besides putting it on your board agenda, keep that front and center so that you're always making decisions with the strategic plan in mind?
Um, it takes a lot of commitment from yourself as the leader of your organization. You have to keep it alive. I was talking to my board chair a couple of days ago, and I had a bit of a sticky problem, and so I was asking him about it, and he said, "Consult your strategic plan." And I thought, "Oh shit, yeah, I should have thought of that. That's a really good idea." you know. So you have to own it yourself, and then you can include it in your staff meetings, for example. Bake it into your staff meeting agenda, not every day, every week, whatever, every month, whatever, but make sure that your staff, you're engaging your staff on a continual basis. The other tool I would suggest is that to have a champion that's on your board, who's holding your feet to the fire, so that maybe they help you design the strategic discussion at the board level every month, but maybe they do a little bit more than that by just sort of helping you keep score, helping you come up with an annual report on your strat plan, a report card, for example, on where you're at with the status of your plan. And that's the accountability that you're creating deliberately by having someone on your board who may be signing your paychecks, helping you be responsible for your own plan. So those are a couple of ideas.
That's a good one. Shelley, what about you?
Yeah, totally agree with what Stu said. I guess in addition, I think ensuring that's incorporated into your communications to the membership, because ideally, if you've gone through the process where you've done a membership survey, ideally, some of those issues that the members identified are going to make their way into your plan, and then you can report out, you told us this is what's important to you. It's in our plan. Here's the progress that we're making. And, I know a lot of issues that chambers deal with, they don't get resolved quickly, quite frankly. So it's not something you're going to be doing every week, but maybe it's twice a year you're reporting out to the membership on the strategic plan. Or I remember a board chair that I worked with, and credit to her, she would, at membership luncheons, I think there was 5 things on the plan at that time, she would make a point of mentioning them in her opening remarks at the membership luncheons. Here's what the chamber's working on. Here's the progress we're making. Maybe they're just reporting on number 2, but again, ideally you're trying to ingrain those strategic plan priorities into the minds of your members. Again, I know that's very idealistic, but hey, as a staff person, I can kind of remember thinking, oh, didn't we just tell them that last month, when she would be up there saying the same thing? But the reality is the average member does not have a sense of, what your vision and mission and priorities are. And it is important that you keep telling them in your communications, when you see them in person, right? Because we know that not everything gets read. So if someone's standing at the front at the podium reporting on the strategic objectives, that's value. And of course, in the annual report, obviously you want to bring forward your strategic plan again.
And that's the whole what's in it for me, right? That we need to keep in mind with our members. That's
right.
my nug. I just took that away. That's a good one. I'm doing a ton of stuff for my members that is part of our strat plan, but I'm not telling them why I'm doing it. Stupid. I should be telling them why. You told us you wanted this, so we're giving you this. So thank you, Shelley. Your work is done.
Yeah. And that's getting baked into all my presentations for our lunch series coming up. So yeah, thanks for that. I know that question wasn't directed at me, but I'll also point out a real simple one. I've got my 2021 strategic plan plastered on a little wall beside me that divides so like every day, every other day, it's kind of just there in a list form that you can kind of see what you can be picking off, or
Get on a
what's
t-shirt.
status. Yeah.
Embroider
Wear it to your events.
Yeah, keep it tattooed on your forearm, and then you got it always there, or put it on the ceiling, whatever you gotta do.
That's great. Super.
Yeah.
So I don't even know whose question is next. We are off our questions because this has been such great conversation. Okay, shall we focus then on different strategies or different methods? Because
Yeah.
I think we've all seen the post-it, the post-it note method, so maybe we can talk about the pros and cons of each. Shelley, do you want to jump into what tools you might use?
Yeah, I think because I've been winding down, I'm not as plugged into all the new technological tools as Stu is. But one thing I would say about chamber plans is like I don't think it has to be rocket science, right? To me, if you're a chamber of commerce, you're concerned about business profitability and community prosperity. And I think that applies to every chamber. And I those aren't my words. I think I got those from ACCE one time, but they really sort of hit home with me, keeps it simple. It's sort of two main things that chambers should be interested in. And then when you kind of go to the next level, you're talking about, to me, enhancing member success. And that would apply to the smallest chamber because, we realize there's chambers at different stages, and a small chamber maybe is not going to be able to have the same, level of goals in the areas of, say, community prosperity and even advocacy. But a small chamber has to be concerned about those activities that are going to enhance member success. And also the organizational improvement I talked about. So one thing that I like to make sure is, unless you sort of separate the two in my mind, like the member priorities and the priorities for the organization in terms of how you operate, it's very easy to get dragged into those organizational things like, oh, what are we going to do about membership? And we need more money. And for the average member, they don't care about that. They're assuming that you're operating effectively. What they're concerned about is what you're going to do for them. So I always feel that has to be the most important part of the planning session, identifying what is it that our members need and how can we address those gaps. And then, yeah, you want to take the time to deal with organizational issues too, but make sure that does not dominate your planning session. Be sure to focus on what's important to the members. So, I mean, through the surveys, through the discussions, I mean, the tools, whether it's sticky notes, or Stu might be able to talk about more of the technological tools. I know we did a few of them with CCEC, but I think it's about winnowing down and identifying the priorities. So, if we say that every chamber, for the most part, has the same framework, what you're trying to get down to is, within that framework, what is it that's unique about our chamber and community? What are the things that we need to work on to help our business members and make our community successful? So I usually, if I'm doing a one-day planning session, usually the morning is spent providing that common base of information, reporting on any surveys or consultations that you've done, and then as a group trying to identify the priorities and come to consensus on that. And then in the afternoon, I would usually spend a little time action planning. And I preface that in saying that, these priorities are going to find their way into the operation plan. And that is the job for staff to do. But it would be great to hear your thoughts and ideas about, which of these 5 things we identified do you think is most important? Who is willing to champion some of these issues? And get some of that framework in place, and also help the board understand, if they've identified 5 things, they're not all going to be done in the first 3 months. So I think it's an opportunity in the action planning for the board to understand, okay, we identified this, but this might not happen until year 2, because that's just the reality of, the resource constraints that we're faced with. So not that I think the board should be developing the action plan, but the board should understand some of the constraints and also some of the opportunities for them. And I think it's especially important for small chambers. If you only have 1 staff or a part-time staff, quite honestly, if you've identified 3 things and there's no board member that wants to help you champion that, I don't think you should pursue that item, because that 1 staff person is not going to be able to do everything they're already doing, plus take on 3 new things. That's just the reality. So you do need to have those champions, especially for small chambers. So I'll leave it at that. Stu might have some more recent experience on. I know both him and his daughter, I think, have been involved in some planning, so he's probably had access to some other tools that he could share with us.
Well, thank you. But yeah, my daughter works at an extremely high level, like she's doing national plans, hospital plans, that sort of thing. So, but it also, to your point, Shelley, as long as there's a structure to it, I could take the same structure that she uses, which is essentially a sports analogy. Where do we play and how do we know when we win? And apply it to a hospital or apply it to a one-person chamber of commerce in Manitoba. So, I think in the end, as long as there's a structure, and if you Google strategic planning platform, or just throw a bunch of words in there, you'll get all kinds of structures back or platforms back that will just help you create a roadmap for your own plan. It's whatever you're comfortable with. The system that I use because we had someone on our board who is well versed in this system take us through the last strat plan that I was involved in when I was still with the Peterborough Chamber, and it was called the SOAR system, SOAR, as in soar like an eagle. And it's based on what are your strengths? And that's a pretty easy box to check, because that's, essentially a half-hour conversation at a board meeting about what your strengths are. It's also a question you can ask in a survey or stakeholder meetings. What is your perception of the strengths of your local chamber? Opportunities is the O in SOAR. This is where people love to put sticky notes on flip charts and, that sort of thing. And sure, there's technology platforms, Shelley, like just again, Google virtual sticky note websites. Klaxoon, I think, is one that came to mind. I think we used a different one for CCEC, Shelley. But bottom line is there's technology, but it's there mostly when you're dealing with people who are long distances apart. To try to take technology and get it up on a screen in a room that everybody's in the room, you're much better off to just use a flip chart and a Jiffy marker. So that's the opportunities. Aspirations is much more blue sky type of thinking. Where do we envision ourselves as an organization? Forget the opportunities, which are much more sort of short-term and immediate and kind of based on what we're already doing, or, shifting things around a little bit. Where do we really want to be? What's sort of the vision for the chamber 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now? And then the results is the R in SOAR, and the results are essentially, how do we know when we win?
Yeah.
What are the measurables, to your point, Shelley? Make it all actionable. Write down what the goal is, who's going to do it, whether it's a short-term, medium-term, long-term goal. What are the resources that we need? Is this going to cost us money? Are we going to need more staff? And then, what are the measurables? How do you know when you've achieved success? And again, if you Google SOAR, SOAR, strategic planning, you'll find a whole website with materials that you can download and all kinds of things, so that you can either facilitate your own plan or find someone within your chamber who can help you as that third party. So you don't have to fly in a consultant.
Although that's fun too, right?
It's definitely fun. Yeah. And I love doing your plan, Melanie, because it really created a conversation that would have never happened if it was just you at the front of the room, or because it's that third party, independent policeman that can say things that you couldn't say. You said it. You felt protected in that meeting, and so you would have never said some of the things that I was able to say, just because I just don't, I don't have the ownership that you have. So yeah.
And there's a credibility attached when you bring in a third party, if you're able, right? So because then it's not you just telling your board that this might be hard or this isn't what a chamber should be doing. I think at our plan, we had someone want us to do a car show or something like that. And although it's a great idea, we have one already in our town, and so I don't need to replicate that. But yeah, and I think that what you've just outlined, both of you, any chamber can transact that. You know, even a one-person chamber can start small, start where they are. And to what you both said, you know, it doesn't need to be 5 things over 3 years. It could be, what do we need to do this year? And
Yep.
like you said, Stu, where do we play and how do we know we've won? I love that.
Yeah.
And
I
that
love that.
SOAR, I've been through a couple of them. It's a fantastic system. So yeah, anybody out there, again, great mention of that one, Stu, because it is a great way to do it, and it gets you away from that SWOT, which you can still kind of
Mhm.
integrate a little bit, and
Yep.
people are
Weaknesses
familiar
and
with it.
threats, you know,
Yeah.
like it's just, who wants to do that? Like,
Yeah.
that's not fun. I didn't volunteer for the chamber board so that I could, you know, depress myself, you know. SOAR is just much more positive, right? And those opportunities, those threats and weaknesses come out in all of those opportunities, right? So yeah, it's just a much, much friendlier conversation to have, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Can you believe it's been 45 minutes already? I
I was
think we
just
all
gonna
need
ask
to
her, yeah.
trundle off to the hotel bar after a conference and have a drink and continue our conversation.
Yeah.
So I have one kind of final question, and Steve, certainly you hop in because I'm sure you might have one too. But you know, so we've done the strat plan. We're all excited about it. We, you know, do our pretty graphics in Canva and we launch it at our annual meeting, and we're all super, you know, pumped about it. And then you get a new board, right? You've got a board that wasn't involved, and or you have new staff that you kind of have to start from scratch on or with. So how do you, if you've got a board or staff members that just aren't on board with what you're trying to accomplish, maybe we can speak to board members more. How do you get them to where you need them to be within the confines of that strat plan?
Go ahead, Shelley.
Well, a couple of things. I think number one, I always like to see the strat plan as part of the new board orientation. So if you have new
Okay.
board members, make sure you're reviewing the strat plan. Make sure they understand what the process was that went into that strat plan. There was a membership survey. The board spent a day doing this. This is, you know, intended to be a 2 to 3 year plan. So, you know, that they're clear. It's not a frivolous document that you just came up with yourself, that this is something, it's an organizational document. It's not even, you know, the one board's document. Ideally, it should be everybody in the organization has had a say in it. But I also think, and you know, one of the things that you'll hear with strategic planning is, whereas, you know, some time back, people might have been developing 3 to 5 year plans. Now it's more 1 to 3. And I do think with how things change so quickly, even if you've developed a 3 year plan, that there is value in having a mini session, you know, maybe a half day, maybe it's a board meeting, where each year you look at, here's what we accomplished, here's what's still, you know, to be done. Is there anything that's happening right now that's, you know, that we hadn't anticipated a year and a half ago when we did this plan? Because things do change, you know, elections come up that you weren't expecting, things can happen. So I think that there is value in revisiting, and not that you're going to throw out the existing plan, but just an opportunity to tweak it if that's what needs to be done. Maybe there's something in the plan that it hardly ever happens, but maybe it did resolve itself quicker than you had anticipated. So, you know, that's been completed. What else might we add into it? So that would be an opportunity for a new board member to provide some input if there were a burning issue. But I think, you know, you don't want to get into a situation either where you're simply adding on more to your 1 to 5 things. There would still have to be a prioritization. Okay, you're right, this is a new issue. Probably important we take it on. Where does that fall with the other issues? Is it more important that we start looking at this, and maybe this falls lower in the priorities? Because again, the board has to understand there's only so many resources. But yeah, I mean, you know, we've all lived through COVID. Who anticipated that in 2019, and how that
Bingo card.
completely
Yeah.
changed what chambers were focusing on? So yeah, things come up, and I don't think you want to be so rigid that you say, we have a 3 year plan and that's it. We're not looking at anything else for 3.
I agree 100%. I would also just add that if you have a board member who's coming on and they're going through the orientation and they have a problem with your strat plan, that's probably the best time for you to get rid of that board member before they're even on your board, because they're going to have way more problems once they get onto your board and settled in and comfortable. So that would be a real red flag for me. But yeah, just make sure the strat plan is part of the orientation.
Yeah.
And just one other thought that I read quite recently that sort of speaks to what you were talking about, Shelley, around having that annual review. I read this comment that said, focus on goals instead of the plan. And goals they seem to me to be much more updatable on an annual basis. And it also allows you to simplify, especially if you're a smaller chamber and you're only focused on one or two goals. Then you have that review at the end of the year to see how you did with those goals and say, okay, what's next? What's our next goal? And that's where you can have that flexibility if something new has come along. So focus on goals more than on the plan. Takes a lot of pressure off the plan and just helps you simplify and focus.
Yeah, that does make it sound simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well put. Okay, so for Melanie, did you have anything?
No, I was just going to say I have to go now and write everything down that you've said because. Oh wait, I can go back and listen to the podcast. That's the whole point.
Keep it on repeat. Yeah. Okay, so for the sake of time, we'll just 30 seconds, a minute. Is there something that we didn't cover that you feel like you just have to share some nuggets of wisdom for anybody out there going through this process or thinking about that journey? Stu, you're first this time.
Well, just kind of going over the notes that I made, and I really don't see anything other than I simply want to say that there's an expression that if you've met one chamber, you've met one chamber. But I think in the end, chambers are fundamentally involved in the same thing, which is sort of maintaining their relevance as an organization to the members that pay them an annual membership fee. And so we're in the business of supporting our members, strengthening our communities, either our business community or the broader community. And so I think as long as we recognize that that we are essentially very similar organizations right across the country, and that we're known for supporting each other, then, to your point, Melanie, about trading facilitators with your neighboring chamber, great example. And I know people would be all over that, and so would you. So that's a really good example of how we just kind of need to support each other as people who are in a very similar business, no matter whether you run the Christmas parade or not.
Don't tell Keitha about
no
the parade.
Kill Santa.
Very nice.
Maybe I could just give a quick example of a strategic plan in action that, how do you know it's working? I always remember when I was working with the Morden Chamber, one of their objectives as an organization was to become accredited. And that's a daunting task if you're not accredited and you're a one-person chamber. So they built it into their strategic plan. And what they did is there's 3 pillars in the accreditation program. So they decided that each year of the 3-year plan, they were going to tackle one pillar and complete their accreditation. And so over the 3 years, they did become accredited, and we were able to knock that off of their plan. And I think one of your questions was, how can you tell the difference between a chamber that has a plan and one that doesn't? To me, that's a very tangible example. Probably that chamber would never be accredited if they hadn't built it into their plan. So, strategic plans do work if you use them. And I think if I could leave a final message, that would be it too. It's not enough to use the plan. Make sure you're using it, make sure it's driving your decisions, make sure when people come with pet projects 8 months after the plan's done, that you're able to say, hey, this is what we're focusing on. So strategic plans are important. They do work if they're used properly.
Well put. Well said. Anything else, Melanie?
Well, I was just going to say the thing with the accreditation, which is awesome, is that actually in and of itself makes you an incredible chamber at the end of that process, because you spent time on the important stuff that lets you do the other more important stuff faster and quicker. So that's my little shout out for accreditation. You know, I believe a lot in it. So, oh my gosh, I could listen and talk to you both all day long. You're just both so generous with your knowledge, and it's what makes me proud to be in the Chamber Network, that there's people like you that are part of it. So thank you so much.
Yes,
You're
thank you
welcome.
so much for being here, and appreciate all of the wisdom and insights that you gave, and some really great tips. So for anybody out there that's catching this that hasn't started a strategic plan, you should be more than well equipped now with getting those starting points. And yeah, we could sit here and talk for the rest of the day and like go off on 16 different topics, but I think we've honed it in pretty well for just keeping it on the subject. But again, thanks Stu, thanks Shelley, thanks Melanie for being a part of this today.
Thanks,
See
Steve.
you
We'll
all.
see y'all later.
Bye.
Thank you.